There was no one flipping burgers. All the grills were cold. Onion rings were in their bags. Fries were growing mold. There were no baristas at Starbucks asking how many shots would you like when all the minimum wage workers went on strike.
That was great. Thanks. All right, well, I'm going to go on a little bit of a spiel. So yeah, I'm also a member of Baristas Rise Up, Shelby. And yeah, so it is no surprise that for young workers, the current job market is not exactly brimming with opportunities. According to a publication put out by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, the Atlantic provinces are projected to lose 4,400 full-time jobs by 2015. And the Atlantic Provinces Economic Council stated that between 2001 and 2010, this region created about 4 times as many low-wage jobs as it did in high-wage sectors. And moreover, during the past 10 years, union density in Nova Scotia has declined while the private sector in Canada remains largely unorganized. Moreover, many statistics cite that as union membership decreases, wealth disparity increases. Considering that low-wage, precarious service sector jobs are the fastest growing in the province, as young workers, we are entering a workforce where we are forced to compete for fewer and fewer jobs that often have none of the benefits such as health plans, paternal leave, sick pay, or pensions that workers of the past fought for and won through the union movement. Here in Halifax, a city that swells to accommodate 300,000 students annually, we have an alarming youth unemployment rate of over 18%, a figure almost twice the average for people aged 15 and older. Moreover, as Nova Scotian students, we graduate with an average of $350,000 in debt plus interest, and we are struggling to pay that off while working minimum wage jobs that at full-time hours, if you're lucky enough to have full-time hours, only has an annual gross income of just over $200,000 before taxes. And that is if we are lucky enough to have a job at all. All of this combines to create a perfect storm in which we are finding ourselves caught in a double bind of over and underqualified, a bind that leaves us trapped in cycles of mounting debt and does not assure us of a good job, but instead keeps us locked in poverty. According to a labor market bulletin put out by the government of Nova Scotia, youth are often the first to be laid off during an economic downturn and the last to find employment when the economy begins to rebound. But for me, this statement only begs the question, just when exactly will the economy begin to rebound? The truth is that the economic landscape facing our generation is very different than the ones that our parents experienced. And so the problems facing us are unique. The workforce is shifting as the forces of capitalism seek to erode the historical gains of the working class. It is no coincidence that many of us, rather than finding stable union jobs with middle-class income, instead adapt ourselves to economic precarity. We're juggling multiple part-time jobs, or freelancing, doing contract work, or unpaid internships are no longer the exception but the norm. Many of us are told that these jobs are transient, and indeed for some of us they will be. But beyond being just a mere symptom of economic instability, these are some of the subtle and insidious ways that capitalism seeks to undermine the collective power of organized workers. We need to recognize what this is, call it by its name, and fight back. And so unions need to adapt themselves to a changing workforce. As Canada's economy has shifted from one based around manufacturing and production to a service-oriented economy, most workers no longer work in factories or even traditional large-scale workplaces. The reality of organizing on the shop floor is very different today than it was 80, 20, or even 30 years ago. And so yes, unions need to develop new and dynamic models of organizing that reflect the current structure of Canada's workforce. But as young workers, we also need to organize. What makes me most excited about Baristas Rise Up is not only that it has managed to achieve material gains in working conditions for baristas, but that we are organizing young workers in a sector that has long been considered unorganizable. I think that in many ways, the strength of Brew comes from the fact that we are a worker-led movement. In our meetings, we have workers coming together from different cafes around the city to talk, share stories, plan, and organize. This model not only connects workers together who might not have otherwise met, but also allows us to build Brew from the ground up as a rank-and-file organizing drive. We benefit from the knowledge of experienced SEIU organizers while also developing our own skills and capacities internally. And moreover, I think this is what Shelby was talking about in your song of solidarity. We get to relate to each other as workers, one-on-one as peers. And in effect, we are becoming both workers and organizers, or workers who are organizing other workers. I believe that this model gives us the foundation necessary to begin building the sustainable drive needed to tackle the large task of shifting industry standards for food service workers in Halifax. And for those of you who are already working or who will be entering the workforce soon, I would encourage you to be critical at your job, not to get complacent, and don't accept unfair treatment or disrespect just because your boss might view you as young, inexperienced, or vulnerable. And most importantly, don't accept a situation just because you are told that you cannot change it or that it's the best you can get. I think that sometimes older activists can tend to write off young people as apathetic, mistakenly confusing a bleak future and a healthy dose of cynicism paired with few viable outlets and alternatives as a lack of a willingness to act. But I also think that it's important for us as young workers not to internalize the psychological burden of what is considered possible. I believe that organized labor can only remain relevant through the vibrancy of militant action by rank-and-file members. As young people, we bring fresh ideas, creativity, and innovation into that organizing. But to do so, we need to unshackle ourselves from truisms like, this is just the way things are, because it's important not to let fear or doubt stop us before we even start. And so yes, the task before us is huge. We are coming of age on the verge of the 24th century, a time which forebodes ecological catastrophe, food insecurity, and an energy crisis, as capitalism is no longer able to expand its global colonialist project at quite the same pace. But the truth is also that the ushering in of socialism or communism or whatever ideal best fits your vision for a future utopian society is not and never will be inevitable. Things can either get slightly better or much, much worse. And it's hard to feel optimistic when those of us engaged in economic, social, or political struggles constantly find ourselves on the defense. And workplace organizing that manages to gain concessions such as set scheduling, worker control of tips, job security, and health benefits may seem like small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. But I truly feel that these struggles are not just important, but necessary. Not only do successful organizing drives bring small wins, which for a generation that has not had a large collective win, means a huge psychological and emotional victory. But they also empower and radicalize young workers, contribute to a culture of workplace militancy and resistance, and lay bricks that help build a foundation for a future generation of competent, experienced, dedicated fighters ready for the long haul. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
There was no one pumping gasoline, no one driving from town to town, no one at the register, all the highways were shut down. Cars were stuck in the garage, CEOs on bikes, when all the minimum wage workers went on